Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Calvin McCormick had built his life with precision. A forensic accountant by training, he transitioned into private investigation 5 years ago, specializing in financial fraud cases for corporations. The work was cerebral, methodical, exactly how he approached everything. His wife, Sharon, a pediatric nurse, balanced his analytical nature with warmth and intuition. Together, they'd created what Calvin considered his greatest achievement, a family. Their home in suburban Portland was modest but comfortable. 8-year-old Henry had inherited his father's sharp mind, already reading at a 10th grade level and obsessed with chess. 3-year-old Emma was pure sunshine, blonde curls, infectious laughter, and an uncanny ability to brighten any room she entered. The only shadow in their otherwise perfect life was Sharon's mother. Dolores Williams had never forgiven Calvin for stealing her daughter. When he and Sharon married 7 years ago, Dolores had opposed it with barely concealed hostility. She was a woman who viewed the world through a lens of control and resentment, her life defined by the grievances she collected like others collected stamps. "She's my mother," Sharon would say whenever Calvin suggested limiting contact. "She's difficult, but she's family." Calvin had learned to tolerate Dolores for Sharon's sake, maintaining cordial distance. But that Friday afternoon in October, everything changed. Sharon had an emergency shift at the hospital. A multi-car pileup had overwhelmed the ER. Calvin was in Seattle, deposing a witness for a case. When Sharon's regular babysitter canceled last minute, Dolores volunteered. "Just 2 hours," Sharon had assured Calvin over the phone. "I know you're uncomfortable, but it's an emergency. Henry will be there too. What could happen?" Calvin had hesitated, that investigator's instinct whispering warnings he couldn't articulate. But Sharon's pleading tone and his own rationality won out. 2 hours. Broad daylight. There's sun present. He'd said yes. It was the decision that would haunt him. Calvin was wrapping up in Seattle, 70 miles from home, when his phone rang. Henry's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, buddy, everything." "Dad." Henry's voice was strangled, terrified. "Dad, please, you need to come home right now." Calvin's blood turned to ice. "Henry, what's wrong?" "It's Grandma." She took Emma into the bathroom and locked the door. "Dad, I can hear Emma crying and Grandma is saying weird things. She told me to go watch TV, but I listened at the door and Henry's voice cracked. Dad, I'm scared. Something's really wrong. I'm calling the police right now. Stay on the line with me." Calvin was already sprinting to his car. Phone pressed his ear. "No, Dad," Grandma said, "if anyone called the police, there would be consequences." She said it weird, like a threat. "Please just come. I don't know what to do." Calvin's mind raced through scenarios, each more horrifying than the last. "Henry, listen to me carefully. You're being so brave. I need you to go to the bathroom door and tell Grandma I'm 5 minutes away and I'm coming in. Can you do that?" "Okay. I'm going to break every speed limit. I'll be there in 40 minutes. Stay on the phone with me." Calvin's car tore down I-5, his hands white-knuckled on the wheel. Through the phone, he could hear Henry's ragged breathing, occasional muffled sounds from behind the bathroom door. Every minute stretched into eternity. "Henry, what do you hear?" "Water running. Emma crying. Grandma keeps saying something about cleansing and making things right." "Dad, what does that mean?" Calvin's investigator mind started assembling possibilities, none of them good. "Stay strong, buddy. Almost there." 38 minutes later, Calvin screeched into his driveway. He didn't bother turning off the engine. Henry met him at the door, pale and shaking. "She's still in there. I did what you said, but she didn't answer." Calvin moved with controlled fury toward the bathroom. The door was locked. Without hesitation, he stepped back and kicked it once hard, near the lock. The door frame splintered. The scene inside would be seared into his memory forever. Dolores stood over the bathtub, where Emma sat in ice-cold water, her lips blue, her small body trembling violently. In Dolores's hand was an empty bottle of children's cold medicine. Several other bottles lined the sink. Emma's eyes were glassy, unfocused. "You weren't supposed to be back yet," Dolores said calmly, as if discussing the weather. Calvin moved like lightning, scooping Emma from the water. She was cold, so cold, and barely responsive. Henry called 911. Now, as he wrapped Emma in towels, checking her breathing, her pulse, his training kicked in. His daughter was drugged, hypothermic. As he worked to warm her, he noticed something else. Thin red marks on her arms. Fresh. What did you do? His voice was deadly quiet. Dolores's face twisted into something ugly. Why should I have done when she was born? She's wrong. I see in her. The same devil that possessed you, possessed your daughter. I was saving my family. The ambulance arrived 8 minutes later. EMTs took one look at Emma and moved with urgent efficiency. Calvin held his barely conscious daughter, murmuring reassurances while Henry clung to his father's side. At the hospital, the full extent became clear. Emma had been given a dangerous cocktail of over-the-counter medications, enough to potentially cause organ damage. The cold water had been an attempt to induce hypothermia. The marks on her arms were from Dolores's nails, restraining her when she'd struggled. The police officer taking Calvin's statement was blunt. Mr. McCormick, your mother-in-law attempted to kill your daughter. We're arresting her now. Emma survived. 3 days in the hospital, but she survived. The doctor said Calvin's quick response had saved her life. But the little girl who came home was different, quieter, prone to nightmares, terrified of bathrooms. Sharon was destroyed. The guilt of leaving the children with her mother, the betrayal of discovering what Dolores had done, nearly broke her. Calvin held his family together through sheer force of will, even as his own rage simmered beneath a calm surface. The preliminary hearing revealed more horrors. Police had searched Dolores's home and found journals. Years of journals filled with increasingly disturbed rants. About Calvin, about the children, about her daughter's betrayal. The entries from the past year detailed a plan. Emma is the key. Remove her, and Sharon will see. She'll come back to me, back where she belongs. Dolores had been planning this for months. She'd researched ways to make a child's death look like an accident. She'd calculated medication dosages. She'd waited for the perfect opportunity. But there was something else in those journals that turned Calvin's blood cold. References to the first attempt and practice run. Calvin brought this to Detective Stuart Kruger, the lead investigator. She's done this before. Kruger was a 20-year veteran with tired eyes. We're looking into it. Your mother-in-law has a history. Hospitalized twice for mental health issues. There was an incident 12 years ago. A neighbor's child nearly drowned in their pool during a barbecue at the Williams house. The parents never pressed charges. Said it was an accident. Find them, Calvin said. I want to know what really happened. Mr. McCormick, let us handle. No. Calvin's voice was steel. This woman tried to murder my daughter. The courts will be lenient. They'll call it a mental health crisis. She'll get treatment, maybe a few years in a facility, and then she'll be out. I need to know everything. Kruger studied him. Don't do anything stupid. I'm a professional investigator, detective. I do everything smart. Over the next 2 weeks, as Emma began therapy and his family tried to heal, Calvin dug into Dolores Williams's past. What he found was a trail of destruction carefully disguised as misfortune. The neighbor's child, a 5-year-old boy, had nearly drowned at that barbecue. The family had moved away shortly after, quietly settling something with the Williams family. Calvin tracked them down in Arizona. After hours of careful conversation, earning their trust, they revealed the truth. Their son had told them Dolores had held his head underwater to teach him to respect adults. They'd been young, scared, and accepted a cash payment to disappear. There was more. A cousin's child who'd mysteriously gotten sick after Dolores babysat, spending a week in the hospital. Another incident with a neighbor's toddler who'd fallen downstairs while under Dolores's supervision. A pattern. A clear, documented pattern that Dolores had hidden behind a respectable exterior and a checkbook. Calvin compiled everything into a detailed report. He gave it to the prosecutor. This is who you're dealing with. This is what needs to be in front of judge. The assistant district attorney, a sharp woman named Letitia McIntyre, reviewed the file with increasing horror. How did no one connect these dots before? Because no one was looking, Calvin said. And because she's careful. She spaces them out. She targets the vulnerable. She's a predator. This changes everything. We're going for attempted murder first degree. No, please. But Calvin knew how the system worked. Even with everything he'd uncovered, Dolores might still find sympathy. A grandmother with mental health issues. A tragic case of delusion. He'd seen it before, as he sat in his home office that night, watching Henry play chess on the floor while Sharon read to a drowsy Emma. Calvin made a decision. The law would have its chance. But if the law failed, and Calvin suspected it might, he would ensure Dolores Williams paid for what she'd done. And his payment plan would be far more permanent than anything a court could deliver. The trial was scheduled for 6 months out. Dolores's defense attorney, a slick character named Brett Clifford, immediately filed for a mental incompetency hearing. Calvin watched from the gallery as psychiatrists testified that Dolores was suffering from delusional disorder, that she'd had a psychotic break, that she was not fully responsible for her actions. Bullshit, Calvin muttered to Sharon. Look at her journals. She planned this for months. That's not psychosis. That's premeditation. But the judge allowed the competency hearing to proceed. During the evaluation process, Dolores was released to a psychiatric facility rather than jail, a facility she could potentially be released from if found incompetent to stand trial. Calvin attended every hearing. He watched Dolores play the part perfectly, the confused, mentally ill grandmother who'd lost touch with reality. She'd shake her head sadly when shown her journals, claiming she didn't remember writing them. She'd weep convincingly when Emma's medical reports were read aloud. And it was working. Calvin could see it in the judge's face, hear it in the courtroom murmurs. Sympathy. The breaking point came 4 months into the process. A psychiatric evaluator recommended that Dolores be found incompetent to stand trial and committed to a mental health facility for treatment. The recommendation suggested she could be released in as little as 2 years if she responded to treatment. 2 years. For attempting to murder his daughter. Calvin left the courthouse and sat in his car for an hour, staring at nothing. Sharon called 3 times before he answered. They're going to let her off, he said flatly. Cal, we don't know that yet. Yes, we do. I've seen this before. She'll get treatment, show improvement, be released into supervised outpatient care. She'll be free, Sharon. Free to potentially come near our children again. The courts will protect us. There'll be restraining orders. Paper. That's all those are. Paper that doesn't stop someone who's already demonstrated they'll kill. There was a long silence. Then Sharon's voice, small and broken. What are we going to do? Leave that to me, Calvin said. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Another pause. What are you planning? Something that needs to be done? I'll never tell you the details. You'll have deniability. But know this, I will protect our family. Whatever it takes. He could hear Sharon's breath catch. Calvin, do you trust me? Yes, she whispered. God help me, yes. Calvin's career had connected him with people most citizens never encountered. People who operated in the gray and black markets, who had skills that couldn't be advertised on LinkedIn. Over the next month, he activated these connections carefully. His first call was to Travis Berry, a former forensic psychologist who'd been disbarred for unethical research practices but remained a brilliant mind in understanding human behavior and manipulation. They met at a quiet bar in the industrial district. I need to understand someone, Calvin said, sliding a flash drive across the table. Everything about them. Their weaknesses, their fears, their pressure points. Travis looked at the drive. This legal. It's research for a case. Bullshit. But I don't care. You helped me when the board was coming after me. I owe you. He pocketed the drive. Give me 2 weeks. His second call was to Monique Proctor, a private investigator who specialized in surveillance and background checks that went deeper than legal channels typically allowed. She'd worked with Calvin on 3 corporate fraud cases. I need someone's life mapped out, Calvin told her over coffee. Every habit, every routine, every person they interact with. And I need it done without them knowing. Monique, a compact woman with severe black hair and predatory intelligence, smiled slightly. The mother-in-law who tried to drown your kid in meds. Yeah, I heard about that. Pro bono, Cal, family rate. I can pay. You helped my nephew beat a false theft charge 2 years ago. You found a real thief, cleared his name, got him his job back. He's a teacher now because of you. We're even. I'll have a full workup in 3 weeks. The third piece was the most delicate. Calvin needed someone who could access systems most people couldn't. He found that person through an encrypted forum he'd used for tracking digital financial crimes. A hacker known only as Phoenix, who operated from somewhere in Eastern Europe. The conversation happened through encrypted chat. CMCC, I need access to psychiatric facility records. Specifically, monitoring treatment progress and release recommendations. Phoenix, that's medical records. Federal crime. CMCC, I'm aware. Name your price. Phoenix, double the usual. And I want to know why. Calvin hesitated, then told the truth. Laid out everything. Phoenix was silent for 3 minutes. Phoenix, my sister was hurt by someone like this. System failed her too. I'll do it for the standard rate. And I'll monitor for free until this is over. Send me the details. Over 6 weeks, Calvin built his profile. Travis's psychological analysis revealed that Dolores was indeed a narcissist with sadistic tendencies, but far from incompetent. She was manipulative, calculating, and had successfully deceived evaluators before. Her core fear was exposure, being seen as the monster she actually was. Monique's surveillance was even more revealing. In the psychiatric facility, Dolores had been model patient during evaluations. But in unguarded moments, caught on Monique's discreet cameras and through interviews with staff members she befriended, a different picture emerged. Dolores had been overheard laughing with another patient about playing the doctors like violins. She'd been caught searching online for news about the McCormick family, and she'd written a letter, never sent, to Sharon, filled with manipulative poison about how Calvin was the real villain, how he'd turned Sharon against her own mother. Phoenix provided the most damning evidence. Access to Dolores's personal email account revealed she'd been communicating with Brett Clifford far more than attorney-client communications required. The email suggested Clifford knew exactly what he was doing, coaching Dolores on how to present herself, which symptoms to emphasize, how to manipulate the evaluation process. It was conspiracy, fraud, obstruction of justice. Calvin took all of it to Letitia McIntyre. This is everything you need. She's faking. Her lawyer is helping her fake it. Nail them both. Letitia reviewed the evidence with the clinical eye of a prosecutor who'd seen everything. Then she looked at Calvin. How did you get this? Does it matter? It matters for admissibility. If this was obtained illegally, then find a legal way to get what I've shown you exists. Subpoena her facility records. Get a warrant for Clifford's communications. Follow the breadcrumbs I've laid out. The evidence is there. You just need to look. Letitia was quiet for a long moment. You're playing a dangerous game, Calvin. I'm protecting my daughter. Different game. Give me 2 weeks. I'll see what I can do. Letitia came through. Armed with Calvin's intelligence, she secured warrants and subpoenas. The investigation into Brett Clifford revealed he'd pulled this scheme before, coaching mentally competent clients to fake incompetency. 2 previous cases surfaced. The state bar launched an investigation. More importantly, with proper legal authority, prosecutors obtained facility recordings that captured Dolores's private moments. Moments where the confused grandmother act disappeared and the calculating predator emerged. The competency hearing was reconvened. This time, the prosecution presented a different narrative. A video montage of Dolores in unguarded moments. The recovered letter to Sharon. Expert testimony about malingering and how to detect it. Calvin watched Dolores's face as her careful construction crumbled. He saw the moment she realized the game was up. Her eyes found his across the courtroom, and the look she gave him was pure hatred. Good, he thought. Now she knows I see her. Really see her. The judge's ruling was swift. Mrs. Williams, I find you competent to stand trial. Moreover, I find evidence of deliberate manipulation of this court's processes. You will be remanded to county jail pending trial. Bail is denied. Brett Clifford tried to salvage the situation, but within days, his own legal troubles buried him. He was suspended from practice, pending the bar investigation. Dolores needed a new lawyer, but Calvin wasn't finished. While the legal system ground forward toward a trial, he'd been building something else. Something the courts would never see coming. He'd been digging into Dolores's finances, and what he'd found was a web of secrets. Dolores had money, a lot of it, that Sharon didn't know about. An inheritance from Dolores's parents that should have been split with her sister, Paula Boyd. Except Paula had received nothing. According to the will Calvin obtained, Paula should have received half of an $800,000 estate. Calvin found Paula living in a subsidized apartment in Sacramento, barely scraping by as a home health aide. He called her, "Mrs. Boyd, my name is Calvin McCormick. I'm investigating your sister's finances. Do you know anything about your parents' estate?" Paula's voice was bitter. "Dolores told me they had nothing. Said they died broke. I never questioned it. I should have, but Dolores was always the strong one. I just believed her. Your parents left $800,000. Your sister took it all. I have the will. I have the bank records. She forged your signature on a quitclaim." Silence. Then that bitch. "Mrs. Boyd, I'm going to help you get what's yours. But I need something from you in return. I need you to understand who your sister really is." Calvin told her everything. The journals. The attempts. Emma. Paula wept. "I need to testify," she said when she could speak. "At her trial. The jury needs to know what she is." "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." But Calvin had one more card to play. One more piece of his architecture that would ensure Dolores Williams never, ever walked free. The trial began on a cold January morning. Dolores had a new attorney, a public defender named Geneva Shepard, who was competent but overwhelmed. The prosecution, bolstered by Calvin's evidence and Letitia McIntyre's determination, was a machine. Calvin sat behind the prosecution table every single day. He wanted Dolores to see him, wanted her to know he was there, watching, waiting. The prosecution's case was methodical. Medical experts testified about Emma's injuries, the drug cocktail, the hypothermia. The timeline was laid out with precision. Henry testified, Calvin's brave son, who described in heartbreaking detail what he'd heard, what he'd feared, how he'd called his father. When Emma's hospital photos were shown, the little girl hooked to machines, bruised, pale, several jurors visibly wept. Then came the journals. Page after page read aloud. The planning, the hatred, the cold calculation. Dolores's defense was thin. Geneva argued diminished capacity, mental illness, a grandmother who'd loved too much and broken under strain. But after the competency hearing fiasco, the jury wasn't buying it. The testimony that sealed Dolores's fate came from two sources. First, Paula Boyd, Sharon's aunt, whom Sharon hadn't seen in years, took the stand and destroyed whatever sympathy remained for Dolores. She testified about the stolen inheritance, yes, but more importantly, she testified about growing up with Dolores. "My sister hurt things," Paula said quietly. "When we were children, she hurt animals. Small things. She'd make it look like accidents, but I knew. I saw. My parents ignored it. Then when we were teenagers, there was a neighbor girl she hated. That girl fell down our basement stairs. Broke her arm. Dolores had pushed her, but no one believed me when I said so. The family moved away. My sister learned early that if you're careful, you can hurt people and get away with it." The second devastating testimony came from an unexpected source. Monique's investigation had uncovered another of Dolores's victims, Clarence Schaefer, the neighbor whose son had nearly drowned years ago. Calvin had convinced him to come forward. Clarence, now a successful attorney himself, told the story of that barbecue with the clarity of truth. "Mrs. Williams held my son underwater. I pulled him out, and she claimed she'd been teaching him to hold his breath. But my son told me the truth later when the nightmare started. She told him, this is what happens to bad boys. He was 5 years old. He looked directly at Dolores. You paid us to go away. $50,000 and a promise we'd never speak of it. I took that money because I was young and scared and I didn't know how to fight someone like you. But I've regretted it every day since. My son is 23 now and still has issues with water. What you did to him, what you tried to do to Emma McCormick, you're a predator. And I'm done being silent." The courtroom was silent when he finished. Even Geneva Shepard looked shaken. Dolores didn't testify. Geneva advised against it, knowing the prosecution would eviscerate her. The prosecution's closing argument was delivered by Letitia herself. She stood before the jury and spoke for 90 minutes, weaving together every piece of evidence into a tapestry of calculated evil. This is not a confused grandmother, Letitia concluded. This is a woman who has spent decades hurting children and hiding behind respectability. Emma McCormick is alive today because her brother was brave and her father was fast. But make no mistake, Dolores Williams intended murder. She planned it. She executed it. She would have succeeded if not for an 8-year-old boy's courage. You have the power to ensure she never harms another child. Use it. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty. Attempted murder, first degree. Child abuse. Assault with a deadly weapon. The judge set sentencing for 3 weeks later. Calvin had one more play. In the 3 weeks between verdict and sentencing, he put the final phase of his plan into motion. Through Phoenix, he discovered something else. Dolores had been documenting her plans in more than journals. She'd made videos, digital files stored in an encrypted cloud account, filmed on her phone. In them, she detailed her hatred of Calvin, her plans for Emma, her fantasies about what would happen after. Sharon will come back to me, Dolores said in one video, her face calm, rational. Once the girl is gone and Sharon sees that Calvin couldn't protect his own child, she'll remember who really loves her. Me. Only me. The videos were sociopathic manifestations, clear evidence that Dolores was not insane but evil. Calvin provided them to the prosecution through an anonymous tip that led to a legal search warrant for Dolores's cloud accounts. At the sentencing hearing, those videos played in court. The judge watched with an expression of growing horror. Sharon, seated beside Calvin, watched her mother on screen and quietly sobbed. When the videos finished, the judge spoke. Mrs. Williams, in 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such calculated cruelty. You're not mentally ill. You're dangerous. You are a predator who targets the most vulnerable among us. She sentenced Dolores to 30 years to life. With good behavior, parole possible in 25 years. By then, Dolores would be 87 years old. But Calvin wasn't done. While Dolores was being processed into the state women's prison, Calvin made a final call to contacts he'd made in the prison system through his investigative work. Not guards, something more subtle. He ensured that certain information about Dolores's crimes made it into the general population. In prison, there's a hierarchy of criminals. Child abusers sit at the bottom. Grandmothers who try to murder their own grandchildren, even lower. Calvin didn't arrange for violence. He didn't need to. He simply ensured that Dolores's fellow inmates knew exactly who she was and what she'd done. Social isolation in prison is its own punishment. Dolores would spend her sentence as a pariah, feared and reviled by even the hardest criminals. 6 months after sentencing, the McCormick family began to heal. Emma was in therapy twice a week, and slowly, the nightmares decreased. She laughed more, played more, started to be a little girl again. Henry had struggled too, processing what he'd witnessed, the responsibility he'd felt. Calvin took his son to his own therapist and watched him work through the trauma. They started a tradition, chess games every evening where they could talk or not talk, just be together. Sharon's healing was harder. The betrayal of her mother cut deep. But with therapy and Calvin's steady support, she began to accept that Dolores's evil was not her fault, not her responsibility. I spent my whole life making excuses for her, Sharon said one night, lying in Calvin's arms, seeing what I wanted to see. I almost lost Emma because I couldn't see the truth. She fooled a lot of people, Calvin said. That's what predators do. They're good at it. You saw her. From the beginning. I'm trained to see. And I love you and our kids too much to ignore my instincts. They were quiet for a while. Then Sharon asked the question she'd been avoiding. Cal, how did all that evidence against her surface? The videos, the emails, the financial records, it was almost too perfect. Calvin chose his words carefully. Sometimes the truth just has a way of coming out. Sharon studied his face in the darkness. I don't want to know, do I? No, but it was legal. Nothing that could come back on us. Let's just say that everything that mattered was obtained legally when it counted. The rest doesn't matter. Sharon was quiet for a long moment. Then, thank you for protecting us, for being strong enough to do what needed to be done. I'd do anything for this family. Anything. 3 months later, Paula Boyd received a settlement of $900,000, her share of the inheritance plus interest and penalties. She paid off debts, bought a small house, and started seeing her niece Sharon regularly, helping to rebuild the family that Dolores had tried to destroy. Brett Clifford was disbarred and faced criminal charges for obstruction of justice. The case against him was built largely on evidence that had mysteriously surfaced through anonymous tips, evidence that Calvin had carefully ensured would be legally obtainable once investigators knew where to look. A year after the trial, Calvin received a letter. It was from Phoenix, the hacker. "You never paid me. I told you I'd monitor for free, but the work I did was worth something. So I've taken my payment in a different way. I've ensured that certain digital safeguards are in place around your family. If anyone ever looks into Dolores Williams's accounts, cloud storage, or communications with intent to harm you or find evidence of illegal surveillance, they'll find nothing. I've cleaned the trail. Consider it a gift from one person who protects their family to another." Calvin burned the letter and never spoke of it again. 2 years after the incident, on Emma's 5th birthday, the family celebrated at home. Emma blew out her candles and made a wish. She was laughing, bright, mostly whole. Henry taught her a new chess move. Sharon baked a cake from scratch. Calvin watched his family, his wife, his children, alive and together and safe, and felt the weight he'd carried begin to lift. He'd done dark things to protect them. He'd crossed lines he couldn't uncross. But looking at Emma's smile, hearing Henry's laugh, seeing the peace returning to Sharon's eyes, he had no regrets. That night, after the kids were asleep, Calvin sat in his office and opened the locked drawer where he kept one final piece of the puzzle. A folder containing everything, the real everything about what he'd done. The calls he'd made, the rules he'd bent or broken, the trail he'd covered. He'd never told Sharon the full extent. She knew enough to understand he'd operated in gray areas, but not how dark those grays had been. And she never would. Calvin took the folder to the fireplace, pages still carefully organized, and fed them to the flames one by one. He watched his secrets burn, watched the evidence of his extra-legal investigation disappear into ash. When the last page caught fire, he felt something release in his chest. It was over. Truly over. Dolores would die in prison. His family was safe. The law had won, with his careful, invisible help. Calvin poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon and stood at the window, looking out at the quiet suburban street. He'd been tested and hadn't been found wanting. He'd been pushed to his limit and hadn't broken. He protected what mattered most. He was a husband, a father, and when necessary, he'd been something else, something harder, something willing to walk into darkness to pull his family back into light. He raised his glass to his reflection in the window, to the man he'd become, to the things he'd done, to the family he'd saved. "Whatever it takes," Calvin whispered, and he drank to that truth as the last of the evidence crumbled to ash behind him. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.